Hello, this is Mike Brill. I am a past PT competitor and member of Swagoi Gaming's Magic Arena team. Here today with a deck I designed, 4-color Yorion. It's a deck that I played to success over this past weekend. I made day 2 of the qualifier weekend. And I've gotten a lot of questions about the deck, so I wanted to just do a quick deck tech on it, give some answers to some folks, get some ideas out there, because I know that it is a quite daunting deck to look at, and there are certainly some more complex strategies the way that I've built it here. To kind of dive right in, the inspiration for this deck really was Chris Batelho, member of the Rivals League, his Mardu Doom deck, and a mix of that, and then Sam Black's Mardu Yorion deck. That was sort of the basis. I was sort of playing around with those strategies, mixing and matching the two decks. And what I ended up finding out was I really wanted to increase the card quality of the deck while improving my Gruul matchup, because even while the decks did have probably favorable Gruul matchups, Gruul is just an incredibly strong and versatile deck, and they were still able to pull out a very sizable number of wins. The matchup wasn't nearly as good as I would have hoped, certainly. So that's sort of why I built this. Adding the 4th color really improves the card quality you can have. I think I can safely say I feel like I don't have any bad cards in my deck, and I really think that that is an advantage I have here. So to start by answering the question that everyone always has, yes, the mana base works. I have done the math, and I have played enough games to know that the math does work in practice as well. So you're a base white deck, certainly, with the Skyclave Apparition, the Archon, Elspeth Conquers Death. So in order to consistently cast Skyclave Apparition on 3, you need 25 white sources. That's really the only shortcoming in the main deck. I only have 22 white sources here. Otherwise, you just need 18 of all the supporting colors here to cast your cards on turn 2. And actually, Dream Trawler, even though you see those 2 blue pips and it's a little daunting, really is just as color intensive as the Omen of the Sea is. Only requires 18 blue sources there. And so really, for the purposes of this deck, the mana base only works if you have the 80 card Yorion deck. And that's really because Fabled Passage is sort of, your 9th to 12th copies of Rainbow Lands here. And by having the larger deck, you're able to fit in more basics, particularly 2nd copies of basics, which is very important for your Skyclave Apparitions and your Croxos post board, as well as Dream Trawler main deck as well, of course. And the way the mana base works in the Game 1 configuration here is you're not playing your pathways on red much at all. And if you ever have a judgment call, you're probably playing them on blue or whatever the other color is. And you're really acting like a base Esper deck, and it's sort of helped out by the fact that your Triomes make some red for you here, so that really helps. It's just sort of incidental red for the Omens of the Forge when you draw them, and then post board, we'll get to that later, but you're probably skewing away from blue and more towards red and black for the Croxos. So again, the mana works. The pathways work just as a regular shock, a regular duel would. And in particular, again, the only double pips you really have are for white here in this deck. So the mana base works very smoothly. So again, I mentioned that the Gruul Adventures matchup is what I built this deck to beat, Gruul is of course the best deck in the format. I think that's pretty undisputed at this point. And it was certainly the deck to beat over this past weekend in the qualifier weekend in the other tournaments. So the deck's main deck is built to beat Gruul, particularly prey on Gruul. I think my win rate against Gruul has been somewhere between 80 to 90%. They can certainly win some games though, generally with Embercleave or a lot of circumstances to Embercleaves, as I found out on day 2 this weekend. But so really the way to beat Gruul is you wanna answer their first 2 to 3 threats, generally coming down turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, sometimes just turn 3 and turn 4, or turn 2 and turn 3. So you need some pretty unconditional removal here to deal with those threats. And as you'll see, we have 16 total cards that will deal with pretty much anything up until turn 4 of the game. Then on top of that, you want to be able to have some removal for the little creatures, their Edgewall Innkeepers and their Brushfire Elementals. And these are great because they don't really lose. They're not a big sinking card advantage to do so. So you can kill an Innkeeper with an Element of the Forge. If it's already replaced itself, you're not too far behind because you can always blink the Element of the Forge with a Yorion later and get some extra value. Or particularly on the play, Elspeth's Nightmare comes down. It kills the Innkeeper, it kills the Brushfire Elemental, and it'll snag a Henge, an Embercleave, or a Vivian, or anything of the like, Shatter Skull smashing from their hand afterwards. Of course, very strong card against them. So again, you answer the first 2 to 3 threats, and then you sort of try to turn the table on them with a big threat. In this case, Archon of Sun's Grace is an incredible card against Gruul. One of the best cards in the format against Gruul. So of course, land your Archon. You start playing one of your mini enchantments, and or you play Yorion and you bounce all your enchantments, put them back into play, make a ton of 2/2 Pegasuses, and just kind of take over the game from there. Of course, Dream Trawler and Yorion itself do a pretty good imitation of the Archon in most cases. Yorion blinking some of your removal spells here, sometimes reassigning your removal spells, sometimes just killing new threats. And then Dream Trawler, of course, what Dream Trawler always does. Tax, gains life. Doesn't die to much of anything. So, again, this is the main deck configuration. You're not really sideboarding against Gruul. But against Rogues, again, I've always felt very favored with this deck against Rogues. In particular, I think you have some very good game. Your answers that are built for Gruul tend to be built pretty well for Rogues as well. In particular, Elspeth's Nightmare. You got some of the instant speed removal here. You got instant speed card draw effects. And then you got some threats where if you land them and they resolve, pretty good chance you're going to win the game. So there's you're not super favored game 1, but you're not super unfavored either. But really, when you come in to those game 2, game 3 games, you're gonna have a lot of power, a lot of silver bullets against the Rogue decks. Of course, in particular, these 6 escape cards. Because generally, if you can keep them off of their 7 or 8 card threshold there in the graveyard, you're gonna be doing pretty well in terms of beating Rogues. And in particular, Kroxa is just, not only does it exile the cards in your graveyard, it's just a massive must-answer threat on its own. So you're not just tapping to not affect the board at all and just exile some cards from your graveyard like you are with Kling. Kling's just kind of here to do that, as well as exile opposing Klings mostly. But Kroxa is coming down to 6/6. It's eating into their hand and providing a game-ending threat that you can just turn the corner with very quickly there. Then of course, Mystical Dispute is good. A lot of times you want to save it to counter their end of the story, but sometimes you just need it to force through a threat, force through a Kroxa, or a Yorion or an Archon or any of those sorts of things. So really, again, this is where you're sideboarding in these cards in the mountain against rogues, and you're going to bring the Dream Trawlers out, and then from bring the Dream Trawlers out, probably some of your clunkier removal, Elspeth Conquers Death, of course, Banishing Light, lower your curve just a little bit, and then really you're playing your pathways on the red or black side here. And ignoring blue to some extent against the rogues deck. So that's kind of how you beat rogues. And then, of course, the third category of decks that are around right now are other Yorion decks. Generally found those to be pretty 50-50. Kind of depends. Again, you get to play the most powerful cards. You're playing a lot of main deck removal, which isn't well served in the mirror. But at this point, so is everyone else. So it's a little different, and even the removal comes pretty in handy against the green-white or green-based more food-based variants of Yorion decks as well. And really, you're just playing a sort of an attrition game against them. All transformational sideboard, all 15 come in. You're sideboarding out. Banishing Light is very bad against Skyclave Apparition, Elspeth Conquers Death, so pretty bad in the Yorion mirrors. Sideboarding out some of your removal, and it varies based on which Yorion deck they're playing, which ones you'll sideboard out, and generally some Archons as well, because again, it doesn't fare well against Skyclave Apparition or Elspeth Conquers Death. Generally, let me take a drink of water here. Generally, you're going to sideboard generally you're going to keep the Dream Trawlers in. So your mana is a little trickier here, and again, it's one of the fun parts of the deck. Maybe fun? I think it's fun. You have a lot more decision points in how you're playing your lands, and you have to be really cognizant of it. And in particular, in these matchups where you're going to have Kroxa and Dream Trawler in your deck, you have to be really, really thinking about it. Generally, you're going to play the colors of the cards that you have sitting there in your hand. But honestly, I think you're going to get the Kroxa mana eventually. Your graveyard's not going to fill up too fast against their deck, which exiles most of your stuff anyways. So generally, like if you have both, I would probably skew towards having all your colors for your other cards, or just towards the Dream Trawler. And those decks tend to be a lot about just creating value with your Yorion hits. In particular, Treacherous Blessing is a big swing there. And in the meantime, you can use things like Skyclave Apparition, Heartless Act Omen, Elspeth's Nightmare to kind of get rid of their blink threats and kind of control the board that way, and make sure that your Yorions are bigger than theirs. Moving forward, the deck certainly is... I lost quite a few games to opposing Dream Trawlers over the weekend, so 2 of my 4 losses were to opposing Dream Trawlers. So while it is very good against certain Yorion decks, you are one of the Yorion decks that is very good against the ways it's set up here. So I think Shark Typhoon's really the answer there. It was in an earlier version of the deck, and I ended up cutting it for the current meta. But I think that's something certainly to add back in as the Esper Doom decks become more prevalent. You might want more of a blue-based counterspell draw go sideboard package for fellow Yorion decks. Of course, Shark Typhoon's going to be good against rogues as well. And again, really what this deck is about is just you get to play 4 colors with a reliable mana base and play all the best cards in your Yorion deck. And Shark Typhoon, those sorts of things are part of that. So I think moving forward, you might want to shift more back to more balanced version of the deck. Cut some of the Gruul cards, add in some more instant speed type stuff for the fellow Yorion mirrors. Yeah, and rogues is kind of on a decline as well. So you just kind of the meta shift. I do think this is a good choice, but you're gonna have to make those meta shifts as things go forward, because this deck was really built for me to farm Gruul, farm mono red, farm other aggro decks this past weekend.